My approach, get your good work on. I wasn't involved in the first go round, but. Got that plan. Well, yeah, part of the home. Everybody appreciate that, so. Yeah, I've seen the stat report. Oh, yeah, it's true. Really good. I think it's seems like a project. Yeah. So yeah. Yeah, I don't know exactly what it was, but yeah.
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 Make sure we can hear you.
Is that how you capture for the live stream?
No, it's just, yeah. And it helps pick up on this as well. It's all through the TV or the microphone up top on the ceiling.
Okay.
And then in the future, I can want to do a vacation. Of this around the piece. Once it's stable.
Sold about a year.
Okay. Once that is in, then the two parties can do a vacation when they're.
Yeah. They come off on it.
Or, yeah.
Okay, we have to come off of work. Okay.
No, that's not very high.
Are you good technology wise? You know?
We're good to go.
All righty. I have 6:30, so I'd like to welcome everybody. Thanks for coming and for your interest in it. So we'll go ahead and call to order planning commission meeting April 18th, 2023. It is 6:30. First order on our agenda is flag salutes.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have a quorum, so if you guys have had a chance to go over the minutes, I would entertain a motion to.
Motion to approve the March minute.
Motion second, any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. Next up is our public hearing. And it is in a matter of continued public hearing from September 20th, 2022. For PUD 2022-011 at 11-984 Rutgers Road, Northeast, Franklin Q-Tip Trust and Columbia Trust Company TRE, 58 or 6.38 acres. Parcel 1 plus abutting right away in the matter of 321 dwelling units on 201 lots. So with that, I will just have to read in. Good evening, my name is Glenn Holm. I am Chair of the Hubbard Planning Commission. I will be presiding over this hearing. This is the time and place set for the continued public hearing in the matter of Bear Creek PUD development file PUD 2022-01. The hearing is now open. It is 6:32 p.m. Oregon land use law requires several items to be read into the record at the beginning of every public meeting. The city planner will review this material. Your patience is appreciated. She goes through these statements.
Thank you, Chair. The applicable substantive criteria upon which this case will be reviewed are covered in the detailed staff report. All testimony and evidence received during this continued public hearing must be directed for these identified approval criteria or to such other rule, law, regulation, or policy which you believe will apply to your state. An issue which may be the basis for an appeal to the City Council or the Land Use Board of Appeals shall be raised not later than the close of the record at or following the final evidentiary hearing on this case. Such issues shall be raised with and accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford this body and the parties to this hearing an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue. The public hearing will proceed with the staff report and any other comments from governmental agencies in attendance, followed by the applicant, and then all those who are in support of the application. All those opposed to the application will then be allowed to speak, followed by those with general comments who are neither for nor against the application. Finally, the applicant will be entitled to a rebuttal period. Please state your name, physical address, and mailing address clearly for the record before your comments. Please try to avoid repetition if someone else has already expressed the same thoughts. It's perfectly all right to state that you agree with the statements of that previous speaker. Please be assured that everyone will have an opportunity to speak. If you have documents, maps, or letters that you wish to have considered by this body, they must be formally placed in the record of this proceeding. To do that, either before or after you speak, please submit the material to Vicky, who will make sure your evidence is properly taken care of. And a note for all parties, no additional continuations of time are possible for this public hearing.
Thanks, Holly. With that out of the way, I need to ask the audience and fellow commissioners a few questions. Number one, does any member of the audience have any objection to the notice that was published? Number two, does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter? Number three, does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare a potential or actual conflict of interest or bias?
I'll just declare a potential out of an abundance of caution. I do serve on a professional development group, Institute of Transportation Engineers, that includes the applicant's engineer. We ran into each other a few weeks ago at a meeting, had a beer, did not discuss any of this.
I would also probably declare under this setting here, I don't believe it's an actual or bias, but I have resided at the property abutting it for my entire life, so 49 years on the west side. So. Number 4, does any member of the planning commission wish to report any site visits or ex parte contacts? Again, I will report in that I did a perimeter drive yesterday with my vehicle, at least where I could reach with roads. And number 5, does any member of the audience wish to challenge the impartiality or ex parte disclosures of any member of the planning commission? City planner, hi, Holly Byron, if you would please give the staff report.
Great. Just one note, you do have a planning commissioner on the way. When he arrives, it would be wise to ask if he has any declarations for this public hearing.
Okay. Duly noted. Thank you.
For the record, my name is Holly Byram, and I work for the Willamette Valley Council of Governments. I serve as the contact city planner for the city of Hubbard and a couple other cities in Marion and Yamhill counties. My job here tonight is to help the planning commission understand what decision criteria they need to consider when they make a motion on this application tonight. So this is a unique situation in that the first part of this public hearing occurred back in September, and we've had several continuations since then. I expect that most people in the room were here in September and so are mostly familiar with the application. We do have a new planning commissioner and perhaps some new neighbors here with us tonight. So it's going to be tricky for me to balance giving enough information but not being too redundant. Your patience is appreciated. The application that we're talking about tonight is a PUD, or a planned unit development subdivision. And what's being proposed is a total of 321 dwelling units on 201 lots. The types of housing that's being proposed includes single-family detached dwellings on lots ranging in size from 4,000 to 7,000 square feet. Single-family attached units, so townhouses, one duplex unit, and several apartment buildings. Now, the apartment buildings, there are 120 units, and those are divided into 5 different buildings that are 3 stories each. Also included in this development are 18 acres of open space, which includes trails that are both gravel and paved, and then public park as well. Of those 18 acres of open space, approximately 5 acres would be active public park. So that would be a playground or a paved trail, that sort of a thing. The site is really unique. If it would be helpful, I can share my screen so we can all follow along here. I may need to be granted permission. Thank you. And after me, you'll hear from the applicant who will provide you some more information about the project, but I will go through the staff report here. So here's a concept map provided by the applicant of the planned unit development. The purple buildings up on the north end are the multifamily housing. The orange buildings are townhouses, and the yellow buildings are the single family. You'll notice on both the west side and the east side, public open space or the parks. Those follow Mill Creek on the west and Little Bear Creek on the east. It's important to note that the developer has concentrated the development in the middle of the property where the elevation is higher, so that they avoid any impacts to the riparian area along the creeks and the wetlands there, as well as the slopes there. So what's really important to focus on tonight is what has changed since September. When we were all here in September, the developer heard concerns from neighbors. They heard comments, questions. Staff was able to answer some of those, and the developer was able to answer some of those. And then they also made several changes to their plan. And I wanted to review those because it shows that they heard community concerns and they adjusted the plan accordingly. So in the staff report on page 4.
Yes.
I'll pause here for a moment.
Hey, Bill.
I was assuming.
Oh, that's okay. So we're gonna go through a couple of declarations, specifically you, the rest of us went through it. So do you wish to declare any potential or actual conflict of interest or bias?
No,
Do you wish to report any site visits or ex parte contact?
I have been visiting the site.
Do you need that fifth one? Read through them, Holly, about impartiality of any member of the planning commission?
It would be good just to ask the audience.
Okay.
and commission.
Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the impartiality or ex parte disclosures of these updated disclosures?
Okay.
Hearing none, I think we're good then. I'll let you give it back to you then.
Great. Commissioner, I was just about to get to the good part here. So we are reviewing what has changed between September and today in the plan for the PUD. And so this is found on page 4 of the staff report. I'll just review a couple of these here. The first thing that's changed is the phasing and the timeline of the project. The project is now proposed to be constructed in 5 phases between the years 2024 and 2028. The development would be starting on the south end and then working up to the north. Based on the feedback of citizens, the applicant has eliminated the proposed parking lane on Broad Acres Road. That was a concern of a lot of people with cars trying to parallel park on Broad Acres Road with the traffic coming through. So there's no parking proposed on Broad Acres. The western park in tract B has been updated now to provide an ADA or an accessible paved walking path. That was something the applicant heard from the community. The open space tracts D and E will still be dedicated to the city. However, the applicant has pulled the stormwater basins out of those tracts as requested by the city, and those will be maintained by the HOA. To address concerns about parking for the apartments, the parking lot at the apartments was expanded, and they had to remove a couple of townhomes to accomplish this goal. The western and southern property lines of the apartment complex were expanded to provide more landscape area for the multifamily complex. You will notice there are a lot of changes to the recreation amenities inside the apartment complex. That was something the applicant heard from both staff and the community of we want more recreational facilities. We want it to accommodate a wide range of ages and interests. We heard detailed comments about skate park facilities. And so the applicant heard that feedback and they have provided covered picnic tables with barbecues for gatherings and a play structure for children, other gazebos and benches, and then as well as skate features as well for skateboarding. Let's see, to address concerns about overflow parking at the southern end of the PUD, the developer has included some additional parking in tracts J and K, and they've maintained the overflow parking in tract H on the north end. The developer is still proposing to install both off-site sidewalks, so there's safe pedestrian connection to town. So this means a sidewalk along 3rd Street on the southern end and a sidewalk along Broad Acres onto J Street on the north side. Those would come with the phases. So they'd start off the southern end, the 3rd Street sidewalk would come with phase 1, and then the Broad Acres would come with phases 4 and 5 at the end there. Okay, so those were some of the changes made to the plan, the applicant maybe could go into some additional detail as well. I just want to do a brief summary of, okay, here's the staging plan. You'll see starting in the end, or starting at the south side, the blue is phase 1. You'll notice that Street A, which is the collector street, proposed to connect 3rd Street on the south and Broadacres on the north. That's not all going to be paved in the first phase, but the northern portion of that street will be gravel so that emergency access can be provided through there. So there'll be a walking route through there, as well as the utilities will be punched through. Okay. I'm going to do a very brief overview of the findings. Most of us in the room heard these in September. We're welcome to answer questions after the fact. So just to give a summary here, the subject property is split zone. That means it has 3 different zones in it. They're all residential, R1, R2, R3, low density, medium density, and high density. All of those zones allow for planned unit development applications. And so that is what the applicant has submitted. PUDs are a little bit different than a conventional subdivision because they allow the developer to have a little bit of flexibility to accommodate the site. Every property is different, and so it gives some flexibility. At the bottom of page 8 is where we start in on some of the development requirements of a PUD. The first one is about site adaptation. That means the developer is accommodating the site, the unique features there. And that's certainly what we see here by concentrating development out of the floodplain, away from those sensitive riparian areas. B is about lot arrangement. Generally, we want to see as many of the PUD lots as possible abutting that open space. In this case, it's a pretty unique layout, so the developer did their best to have as many sites as possible on that open space. C is about the density of development. The way that PUD density is calculated is based upon the zoning on the property there. In this case, the applicant could have up to somewhere between 490 and 543 units. That is not what's being proposed here. They are proposing 324 units. So even though some of the lot sizes may feel uncomfortably small compared to other more traditional neighborhoods in Hubbard, they could have gone much higher with their density on this site. When city staff first met with the developer, we really encouraged them to have a variety of housing types on this property. We know not everyone can afford a single family detached house. We've heard the city council talk about how they want to see their children be able to afford to return to Hubbard and have a starter home. And so the applicant heard those concerns about having a mix of housing types. D is about open space. The minimum required is 20% of the gross area. The applicant is proposing much more than that, with 18 acres. Let's see here. I reviewed that those 18 acres contain trails and parks. No longer do they contain these stormwater swales. At the top of page 12, I provided kind of a zoomed image of what that public park will look like. It has parking on site. It will have a play structure and an open play field as well. And then you'll have connections to the trails. Criteria E is called a community option, and that's the ability of the developer to dedicate the park to the city. In this case, both tracks D and E will be dedicated to the city. However, at this time, the city doesn't have the capacity, the people, to maintain those parks. So the recommendation is that they are not completely dedicated to the city until full build out of the PUD, so that the city has the revenue there to maintain staffing. F is about structure setback provisions. PUDs allow a developer to ask for certain modifications to the design standards. So that's basically variance. The developer is requesting some reduced setbacks internal to the site, but all the lots on the perimeter will have those underlying zone setbacks. D is about circulation. It's really important, especially in small communities, that development pays for itself. And in this case is no exception. The developer is required to pay for all of the streets and utilities in their development. All the streets are proposed to be public. Those are being developed to the standard width of right-of-way and cross-section. There are a couple of alleys that are proposed to be kept private, and those would be maintained by the HOA and private tracks. Let's see here. The developer is asking for those alleys to be narrower than the standard cross-section for a private street. However, the fire department is simply requesting that we have no parking throwaway zone signs on those alleys to ensure that we have full access for emergency equipment through there. H is about off-street parking. In Hubbard, every dwelling unit that's constructed has to have 2 off-street parking spaces. And this development is no different. Every single family house that's being developed will have garage and driveway parking. For the apartment units, it's still the same 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit, and that is being provided in the large apartment parking lot. Also in that section is bicycle parking. Your code requires 1 bicycle parking space per multifamily apartment. Those bicycle parking spaces are being provided both in the breezeways of each of the apartment buildings, and then there's also some clustered in the center of the parking lot in a covered shelter. On page 15, I've included just a zoom of the development so you can see where some of these parking areas are. You can see my cursor, not very well, unfortunately. You'll see on the north end of the PUD here is where they've added some additional parking and they took away a couple of townhomes. Tract H is where they have the overflow parking for those northern townhomes. And then on the southern end of the PUD, this new parking lot here in Tract K and some new parking spaces in Tract J. Okay, so criteria I is about utilities. This application was reviewed by our public works superintendent as well as the city engineer. Staff has been in discussion with the applicant for months, if not years, about the standards that they'll need to meet in providing utilities to this property. Fire department has also participated in those discussions. Just a quick note on storm drainage. The applicant is providing storm drainage for the entire development in 5 different storm detention basins. And those are located in tracts that will be owned and maintained by the HOA. All the utility plans will be reviewed by Public Works and the city engineer again in the civil plan sets before we approve construction there. J is about a homes association or a homeowners association, an HOA. Those are required for a PUD development. In this case, the HOA will maintain a couple of tracts, and those include the private alleys that provide the alley-loaded access to the townhomes, as well as the storm water basins and the private parking lots. At the bottom of page 18 is where we get into the development standards for land divisions. These are standards that will apply to all partitions and subdivisions. And these are things like minimum lot area, how big these properties are proposed to be. I provided a table here on this page that shows some of the variances or modifications to the design standards that are requested by the applicant. In this column on the far right, I've tried to provide the special standards that are requested. So as an example here, for a single family dwelling in the R3 zone, the minimum lot size typically is 5,000 square feet. The applicant is requesting to go down to 4,000 square feet. For a townhouse, 3,500 square feet, instead is being proposed to be 1,735. Let's see, for multifamily, this is an important one. So this was something we had a lot of discussion about back in September. For the apartments, some of the concern was that they were requesting a very small minimum lot size, which resulted in a high density development without providing all the minimum landscaping and recreation area. And so what they've done is they've increased the size of that apartment complex property so they could provide more landscaping and more recreational amenities. And so that brought up their minimum lot size that they were requesting. So previously they were requesting a minimum lot size of those apartments of 1,900 square feet. And now it's bumped up to 2,295 square feet. Okay, so I'll move along here. There's some more standards for lot width and depth. Access is an important one. The city has a standard for access, which means that we're not creating any landlocked properties. So every property that you approve has to have access to a public street. And so in this case, they simply need to meet the minimum width. For a single family home, that's 25 feet width. They do have a couple of flag lots proposed. And so again, that's where a lot is accessed by a long skinny strip. And in this case, there's a couple that are back-to-back flag lots, and they are proposing to share an access driveway. That can be accomplished. There's a condition of approval related to that. They need to ensure that they have that shared access and maintenance agreement in place. And then once that shared access driveway gets to be a certain length, they have to provide a turnaround for fire equipment. Let's see here, moving along. Perfect timing for the spring. We will pause. Okay, I'm going to skip through some of these things here. I've addressed some of the street standards that all the public streets are proposed to meet the city standards for width of right-of-way and improvements. The only streets that are proposed to be more narrow than the city standards are the private streets. Those are the alleys that will be maintained by the HOA. So the applicant did contract traffic impact analysis, a TIA, and that was performed by an engineering firm. And what I've done in the staff report is I've just provided the executive summary. When you provide this many new units, this many new houses with residents, you're going to have some impacts to your local roadways. And that will happen over a couple of years. What those engineers look for was to ensure that the amount of traffic was not going to trip any of these roadways into a failing classification or into a different street classification. So they want to make sure these intersections continue to function at an acceptable level. There was, there's more information provided in the executive summary here, and perhaps the applicant can get into the details. I will highlight that one potential mitigation proposed in the TIA was that the applicant could potentially stripe 2 lanes, northbound lanes, at the intersection of 99E and Grimm Road. And staff talked with ODOT about this at some length, and ODOT determined that actually it wouldn't be quite so simple as striping those lanes. There may need to be some pavement analysis, there would need to be more signage, and actually it might conflict with the road coming off of the way station. And so ODOT's recommendation was actually not to perform this work off-site. ODOT does not have the ability to collect proportional shares from a developer towards some future project. ODOT can't do that. Marion County can do that, and they are requiring proportional shares be paid by this applicant. What that means is Marion County has an adopted transportation plan for their entire county. There are certain intersection and roadway projects that have a price tag attached to them. And when new developments come in that will impact those projects, they are required to pay county dollars per trip. And so in this case, the applicant will pay proportional shares to Marion County as each phase is recorded of the subdivision. So those two projects specifically for Marion County are the widening of Bloomsbury Road between Broadacres and the Woodburn UGB, and the widening of the Woodburn-Hubbard Highway between Woodburn and Hubbard. The total proportional share cost is estimated between $275,000 and $300,000 paid by the applicant over the course of the 5 phases. Okay. We'll skip some of the other detailed standards here. Okay, we talked about street width and alley width. I've included a screenshot from the FEMA flood maps. The Hubbard Development Code includes sections related to wetlands and floodplains and riparian areas. And I'll just repeat that the applicant has taken great efforts to stay out of the sensitive riparian areas. This application has been reviewed by the Oregon Department of State Lands, and they have provided comments for the application. They agreed that the development appears to cover those sensitive areas, and they do have procedures if any development occurs within those sensitive areas, which might include the connection of 4th Street to the PUD. Okay. The last piece, when an applicant includes a multifamily development in a PUD, if they provide enough detail, then they are not required to submit for a site development review, which is typically required if someone were to walk into City Hall today and say, I'd like to build an apartment complex. A site development review is a detailed review of a property, and that includes things like parking and landscaping and lighting and setbacks and all of these pedestrian connections and so on. And so the last part of the staff report reviews some of those pieces. I think of interest to some people in the room, specifically on page 45, I have provided a zoom of the interior of the apartment complex so you can get a better glimpse at the skate features that are proposed here. Those are proposed to be fenced so we don't have any wayward skateboards hitting cars or skateboarders hitting cars that are parked on the perimeter. In the middle here, you'll see the gazebos and benches and bike parking. And then over here is the children's play area, picnic tables with barbecues. And at the southern end is the community building. That's where the apartment manager's office is. Here are the elevations provided by the applicant of some of those buildings. As I said previously, back in September, the apartment complex didn't meet the minimum standard for landscaping or recreational amenities. It now meets those standards. Okay. So I am happy to answer additional questions after this if I've skipped over anything too much. At this point, what I do want to tell the commission is that After consulting with Public Works and the city engineer, Marion County, the fire department, Department of State Land, we feel like we're in a place where we can recommend approval of this PUD application, subject to the recommended conditions of approval. Some of the conditions have changed since September. Mostly conditions have been removed because some of our concerns have been addressed. So I can go through this briefly if you like. I'll just share that the first one here about land use approval, they will need to record their first phase of their subdivision within the next 2 years. And time extension is required. The next one is about improvements required. All of the public improvements required with this project will be constructed to Public Works adopted standards. I do want to point out that condition 3 talks about phasing. We understand that the phasing sometimes has to change a little bit, and so we want to ensure that we allow the applicant to do that, specifically because the applicant is requesting some SDC credits for some of their improvements, and they may want to rearrange some of the phasing slightly to maximize those credits. Street A improvements. Again, this would mean that Street A would be gravel along the north end for a while to provide emergency access, but then would be paved as the abutting development is constructed. Number 5 is about Broadacres Road improvements. There's a typo here I would like to point out. Under 5, A is a holdover from the prior staff report. Staff recommends striking A completely. A said that Broadacre Road sidewalk would be constructed with phase 1. That makes no sense because under the new phasing plan, development starts on the south end. So your pedestrian connection is going to come from 3rd Street. And so that's stated in sub D. So in your motion, staff recommends striking 5A, keeping 5B through D. 6 is about the open space and how it gets dedicated to the city. Again, the recommendation is that the development is fully built out before those parks are transferred over to the city. 7 is about stormwater basins. 8 is about proportional shares. 9 is about the phasing of those proportional shares. The county will allow the applicant to pay those shares in phases prior to the recording of each phase. 10 is about multifamily development. Let's see here. 11, townhouse maintenance agreements. This allows the future owners of those townhouses to, or requires them to collaborate on maintenance to their structures, including replacing the roof or repainting the exterior of their property. 12 requires fire department approval prior to each phase to ensure that we have sufficient access and turnaround as we work phase by phase. Emergency trail access is number 13. If there are any incidents on the trails, we need to ensure the fire department has access there. So we would expect to see bollards with gates there at those trailheads. 14 is about garbage and recycling approval. 15 is about sewer data. It sounds like we're still waiting on a little bit more of flow meter data from the pump station. 16, alley tow-away zones. This is the signage that we need to see in the alleys to ensure that emergency vehicles can access the backside of all the townhomes. 17 is about neighbor access. We have a typo here also. Let's see, is it track V in the southern end? I believe. Is it still track G, Steve, where the prior 4th Street alignment is? We need to make sure that the neighbors there have access to their property through that alleyway.
It's J.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, so this is another typo. Track G should read track J. Those were renumbered. So 5A, and then this is condition 17 needs to be track J instead of track G. Okay. 19 is, or 18 is about easements, 19 is about pedestrian crossings. They need to be clearly signed in the PUD. 20 is about perimeter setbacks, 21 parking lot lighting, 22 lot frontage lengths. So each phase that we're reviewing the plat for, we're going to make sure that all those single family homes have that minimum frontage of 25 feet. Flag lots, again, they need to have that shared access agreement between the two lots. Bike racks, there's a recommendation for bike racks at the public park. Vision clearance, this is important at the intersection of all public streets and driveways and alleyways so that drivers can safely make turning movements without conflict. 26 is street trees. 27 parkway strips. 28 access management. 29 addressing. 30 track J development. Quick note about track J here. Part of the old 4th Street right of way is still outside of city limits. There is a neighboring property that's not in city limits. When they annex in the future, they'll bring in that half street. Then both parties can petition the city for a street vacation of that old 4th Street alignment. When that occurs, the applicant may have the ability to create another parcel at the southern end of track J. This simply states that that proposal is not reviewed with the PUD, and those procedures will occur in the future if and when the time is right. 31 lot grading, 32 signage, 33 homeowners association. 34 riparian and wetlands. 35 riparian buffer. 36 final plat. Okay. Staff's recommended motion is actually number B of the planning commission options. And that is to approve the PUD subject to these findings and conditions as modified by the planning commission. Staff's recommendation is 2 modifications. One is to condition of approval 5A to strike A, keeping B through D. And then for condition of approval 17, changing track G to track J. That's it from me. You've heard enough of my voice. I'm happy to answer questions. Public Works is also here. I'm sure he would love to answer questions as well.
Thanks, Holly.
Yeah.
Questions from commissioners for staff?
Yeah, I'm kind of new to this. Has there been any discussion about adding another Union Pacific grade crossing to get access to 99E from the development?
Unfortunately, we can't. The agreement we've got with the railroad in the state only allows us 3 crossings. So we can open up, say, J Street, but we'd have to close D, A, or G.
Right. Okay, thank you. Do you know, so actually, follow-up question, if you don't mind. As Hubbard grows, is that plan to open a negotiation in the future? Like perhaps there's another development 50 years from now. Like, is that something that that can be in consideration?
I imagine it is, but until we get to that point and cross that bridge, at this point, we can only have 3.
Yeah.
But yeah, say we push out north, it may be something to take up with the railroad in the state.
Okay.
At that point.
All right, thanks.
Anything, Phil? Not yet.
Okay.
Patrick? I have a question just on connectivity to existing infrastructure. Could you speak to that just a little bit about I understand that there's been improvements that have been ongoing with sewer system, with wastewater treatment. Irregardless of whether this has been happening, I just wondered if you would speak to that just a little bit.
Certainly, we did some research with both the water plant and the wastewater plant, the capacity is there. Water plant, we could actually put out almost 3 times what we are providing today with what we've got in the way of, filtration and water rights from the wells. The wastewater plant, this will push us to our limits pretty much. We are looking in the near future of doing some upgrades, but it's not because of capacity. It has more to do with old systems. We've got some systems down at the wastewater plant that are as old as I am. We were put in the 60s. So we're hoping to do a little bit of remedying that in the next couple of years.
Thanks. I appreciate it. If there's no other questions, we will go ahead and move on to the public testimony part of this hearing. So with that, just a reminder, I'll have the applicant, I'll give the applicant an opportunity to speak first. For our staff to be able to record names, addresses, please clearly state your physical address and your mailing address. In case we have to do mailings, it makes it much easier than then have to go chase down an address if somebody hasn't provided it. So I appreciate that. So go ahead.
Sure, this is working for me.
Oh, 45 minutes. Oh, there we go.
Good evening, planning commissioners. For the record, my name is Steve Kay of Cascadia Planning and Development Services, and I'm representing the applicant this evening. My physical address, 15475 Drew Lane Northeast, and PO Box 1920 in Silverton, 97381. It's good to be back here after a very long absence. Following our last meeting, the property owner carefully assessed all the comments that were provided, and we really tried to make sure that we addressed as many of those comments as possible with this revised plan. I personally believe that this current proposal provides some significant improvements over what you viewed last September. So this illustration is the overall concept plan. So we wanted to make sure that the layout kept what was really great about the last plan that you reviewed. So this plan still preserves the natural areas along Mill Creek and Little Bear Creek as open space. There's 2 new public parks. Public access to the viewing areas along those riparian corridors will be provided by a 4,000-foot long trail system. We wanted to make sure that we are still meeting the public need for diverse housing types. So the layout includes a mix of small and medium-sized single-family lots. There's townhomes in the plan and multifamily units. Public transportation needs are addressed by the development by the new collector street that's proposed, connecting Broadacres Road with 3rd Street. And there's also new public sidewalk connections that will be installed between this site and the neighborhoods to the east of the property. The northern portion of the revised master plan includes street widening, a curb, street trees, and sidewalk along the entire Broadacres Road frontage. However, there were some concerns at the last meeting about parking on Broadacres, so we have eliminated that parking lane. To provide some additional parking for the apartment complex, the applicant removed 3 townhomes and added another parking area in the northwest or northeast corner of the site. And to increase pedestrian connectivity, an off-site sidewalk is now proposed along the south side of Broadacres Road between the property and Walnut Court. The north end of the development still includes townhomes which face the collector street. And those have alley loaded garages in the rear of the lots. There's 40 townhomes in this portion of the site. And the applicant's proposing a 27 space parking area in addition to 61 spaces that will be available along the collector road. The new layout provides nearly 17,000 square feet of outdoor recreation space within the complex. Adjacent to a larger community building is a new child play structure, as well as the previously proposed outdoor picnic area. Next to the bike shelter in the central portion of the site are several proposed gazebos and bench seating areas for community interaction. A large above-ground street boarding skate area for older kids is also now proposed within the central portion of the apartment complex. With the addition of these new amenities, the recreation needs of all age groups can be met. In the central portion of the site, the proposed trail system provides multiple connections to the adjacent neighborhoods and streets. A convenient trail connection is also provided between the apartment complex and the public park. Amenities in this portion of the western park are ADA accessible and include a parking lot, children's play structure, restroom, bicycle racks, and a playfield. The proposed trail system along Mill Creek on the western boundary of the site extends all the way to the southern boundary. The trailhead includes now at the cul-de-sac area 88 parking stalls. And from this point of the trail, a paved accessible route is provided with viewpoints along the Mill Creek corridor. The southern master plan illustrates the proposed collector street will intersect with 3rd Street, consistent with the city's transportation system plan. Offsite improvements include the extension of 4th Street from Cooeyman Estates to the Bear Creek project. The applicant is also now proposing an off-site sidewalk connection along 3rd Street to the existing sidewalk at the J Street intersection. To address the concern regarding parking for the 30 southern townhomes, the applicant is now proposing to develop 12 off-street parking spaces near 4th Street. The new parking areas are provided in addition to 74 on-street parking spaces in the southeast area of the site. This current proposal includes only one phasing plan. The developer will first install all the public improvements which are located in the area colored by blue. Phase 1 will also include curbs and base lift for the collector street all the way to Broad Acres Road for secondary access for emergency services. In addition, the off-site sidewalk along 3rd Street will be installed with phase 1. Phase 2 is colored in purple, and phase 3 is yellow. In phase 4, you'll see that we're proposing to finish the northern segment of the collector street, and 4th Street will be extended to the site. The Broad Acres Road frontage improvements will be developed with the fourth phase of the development, as well as the off-site connection along Broad Acres Road. The final phase is shown in green, and that's the apartment complex. So to recap, the revised layout for the Bear Creek project addresses a number of comments that were raised at the last public hearing, including the design of recreational amenities within the apartment complex, the provision of additional off-street parking spaces, increasing ADA accessibility within the park, and the installation of off-site sidewalks along Broad Acres Road and 3rd Street. We believe that this current design helps fulfill the city's long-range plans for this area of the community. We thank you for your consideration this evening, and I'll be available to answer any questions.
Thanks, Steve. Any questions from commissioners?
There was a concern about the lot size, and that has not changed much.
There are smaller than average, probably in Hubbard size lots with this development. This is a plan unit development, so the exchange for that smaller area of yard in your lots is the provision of 18 acres of public park area with the project.
I
That's
understand,
offsetting that.
I understand all that. Just still the feel is not Hubbard because of the lot sizes, in my opinion. They're just too tight.
The developer decided to try to come up with a compromise in that area, in that we're providing a variety of different housing types. Developer could propose all apartments instead and push it up to the maximum density for the site, which would give you more space between the buildings, but they'd be 3-story structures everywhere, and there'd be a very large parking area that would be required. So they looked at what the market need was, and that's why this particular design was proposed.
Patrick and Mark, any questions?
Actually, that was really thorough. I appreciate that. I'm not gonna this now. Thank you. Sure.
All right, at this time, if there's anybody who would like to speak in support of the application, please come forward.
Well, my name is Rocky Sherwood. I'm at 2622 Nina Place, Hubbard, Oregon. First of all, I'd like to say thank you, Holly, for being real, where I can understand. And thank you for all that you did with from the testimony report. My only question is, I know with our shortages of our officers lately, who's looking to have to respond in case of emergency, police or fire to these units? Woodburn, Hubbard, or is it just gonna rely on us? Because my concerns about that is if our officers leave our town to go to their thing, who's gonna be here to support if we have emergency in our nearby community of all the members that's pre-existing, which we're having a lot of issues with our officers. We actually have officers helping in Woodburn and stuff, but we're short-staffed now as far as officers, and what kind of pressure is it going to put on our city staff as far as managers and everybody else in public works? I mean, I'm all for change, but I also don't want lose our employees to having strokes, to be overworked, and our community being without sources because we're short right now. That's my concerns. I mean, I'm all about meeting new kids and putting on events and sharing with everybody that's moving to town, but we gotta look at the logistics part about the safety of our residents now and our employees. You know, we can't overwork them. You know, we're a small town, country town, so this is going to have to lead to a bunch of personnel that we're gonna have to hire, and we don't have the money, I don't think, to hire a lot of extra employees. And so I'd like to see I trust Bill and I trust everybody else. I just throwing it out there. Maybe you guys can help with some of my concerns if they are legitimate concerns to you guys as well. So that's all I got.
Have we looked at that at all? What the city, what we will need if we need to hire anyone else with the new development?
So my understanding is, you know, when you build out, you do get a tax base eventually that comes back, and then so as the build out, the revenue, we'll get more revenue, and possibly be able to hire some additional employees. I'm sure the administrator would love to put her 2 cents in on that.
Literally, 2 cents. No, I appreciate that, Vicky. So yes, with this expansion, we would increase our tax base, so we would be receiving revenue from that as well as our utilities. So that revenue would increase. We would have to do some more research to see how much staffing level that would impact. You know, there are some concerns about the park and the maintenance and what that looks like. So there's conversations occurring with the superintendent and myself about what the future of that would be. But again, that's yet to be determined as far as the number of staff and the cost impact, if any.
In the common sense, good. And the police said they wouldn't have any issues that they can get service in that area
Correct.
at our last meeting.
Anybody else want to speak in support? We will move along then. Does anyone want to speak in opposition of the application?
There's a neutral, right?
There is. And lastly, is everyone who would like to speak either for or against, but have a neutral position on the application?
Am I going first? Okay.
Crystal Rossville, 34274 4th Street, Hubbard. So the first thing that I bring up is I'm with you on the lot size for the townhouses, the 1,700 square feet. That is the one that really gives me heartburn. That's very, very tiny to be able to put a townhouse. I'm thinking of I think it's Villalobos in Wilsonville that had that extremely large fire that spread like wildfire throughout because there literally no other area. So that is a large concern to me. I understand that not everybody loves lawn and that's okay. But I think that is probably, if I read it correctly, half of what is typical. And so I'm against that component. Traffic still continues to be a concern. I don't know if you have the number or not, but how many parking spots per living location is there? Because I hear a lot listed, but it still does not seem like there's 2 per either home or apartment. And since we have no mass transit available here, minus a bus randomly, if you're thinking of any couple that's going to live there, you're going to have 2 vehicles. So do you know if there's 2 spots per?
There's at least 2.
Per every apartment and every home?
Yes.
Okay, and does that include on-street parking?
No.
Okay. Thank you for answering that one. Then, the also thing is, I appreciate the skate park. I'm a little concerned that it's in the middle of a busy parking lot, just from my trauma experience. The other thing was, sorry, I'm reading my notes here. I have one more page of notes. In the past, HOAs have never been successful in Hubbard. I really have a concern that the private alleys, the parking lots, and the water catch basins are all going to be required to be maintained by an HOA. And I didn't hear it spoken of if there was an HOA contingency plan, or if there was a contractual length of time that the HOA would be involved in that. There was an HOA supposed to be on the, I don't know, what do they call those houses down at the Dorsey and Baines and all that? I'm not sure of the name of the development, but that HOA was never set up correctly and was never followed through. So that was my other piece. Let me just make sure I didn't miss anything. Sorry. Talk about traffic. Oh, the traffic on 551, has Marion County considered the traffic impact to I-551? Because if you work north of Hubbard, you would take 551. And if you work south, you take Woodburn to be able to get on the freeway. Boone's Ferry is no longer an option since it's a right-hand turn at Ellen Road. Only from Boone's Ferry. So I would ask why 551 has not been looked at.
Which actually a good point that,
Yeah.
that I just thought of is, putting in tolls on I-5, more people are gonna take
Yes.
551. And to avoid those tolls,
Right,
which will just increase the number of cars
on 99,
like dramatically.
yes, extensively. So on that, and with 99, has there been any movement from ODOT or Marion County on adding additional traffic signal? Currently in our city, we only have a traffic signal at one light on D and 99, which seems like it's not enough if you want to take a left from the closest road, which would be G, is it G? So on G Street, yeah, you would have to wait at a flashing yield from 99. So was there any additional information regarding placing another signal light on 99?
So I do have some information that's outside of this project
Uh-huh.
and is actually associated with the current regular legislative session.
Right,
So there is a bill, going through the legislature, that's looking at funding, additional, lighting and also kind of reconfiguring that whole area so
Okay.
that there's an easier flow of traffic. A similar project, if you want to take a look at it, is over in the Independence area. So they have implemented that project and then they expect that one to be complete in a couple of years, but this is the next place that they're looking at.
okay, great. So, let me just look at, I covered lot sizes, parking and traffic and the HOA. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Anybody else who would like to speak on an intro position?
Hi, Tammy Sweet, 3983 8th Street in Hubbard. I just have a few follow-up questions, probably not a whole lot of commentary. Did you say that the traffic study that you did do is available online for review? Okay. So who is going to own or maintain ownership of the apartment complex?
I would probably let the applicant answer that in a rebuttal.
Who will maintain ownership of the apartment complex?
I don't know at this point. Not sure.
Yeah, so right now, the property owner accepting the shoes is the applicant, and so ultimately, whoever develops the property, the apartment building will own
Okay,
it. The HOA, of course, I know there's questions about that. Well, I can talk more about this in my rebuttal, but that's the answer to your question. So what is going to happen based on the way that the staff report is and the proposed conditions is that whoever wants to build those apartments will have to come back in for a second application, provide additional detail that was missing from this one, because again, this is kind of a broad look, it's almost kind of like a master plan. And so while the buildings will be situated where we're proposing them to be, there's going to be more meat in the bones, so to speak.
so that apartment complex basically will be up for sale.
Well, it doesn't exist, yeah, it doesn't.
In a sense, after the build out's done.
Right, so, the goal, of course, is to have the developer purchase the project. And that developer will have to come in for a second application.
Okay.
With the required details. So this is not the last time that you'll see that proposal come before, the city.
And excuse me if it's redundant, are the townhomes, are those rentals as well, or will those be
They're single
owner
family,
occupied?
single family homes.
Owner occupied?
People could rent their home if they choose to. A property owner could rent them, but they will be single family ownership.
Gotcha. Okay, and will everyone in the entire development pay into the HOA program, or will the apartment complex be exempt? And, whoever owns that will pay in through,
That,
taxes and stuff.
that hasn't been determined whether or not the apartment complex owner and the rest of the HOA would be part of the same system. But there will be at least several levels of HOA
Gotcha.
ownership, because some facilities like the private streets are just going to be used by just specific property owners.
Okay. And then, if you could repeat the two roads that were going to be widened, you said Broad Acres, and I kind of missed it. I was trying to write.
It was Broad Acres and.
Or, I'm sorry, this is a question for staff.
She wanted to know what the two roads are gonna be widened.
The first one is Boone's Ferry between Broad Acres and the Woodburn UGB. It'll be widened to 32 feet. And the second one is the widening of the Woodburn Hubbard Highway between Woodburn and Hubbard. That would be widened to 28 feet.
Okay, great. Yeah, for your time.
Anybody else who want to speak to this? Otherwise, I will give the applicant a chance to rebut if they have any additional information they want to add or comments.
I tried to write notes for all the comments that were provided, but if I missed something, please let me know. I believe the question about the police and fire services was answered by staff, but what happens is that property taxes are collected. There's a portion of that that goes into the city's general fund, and this general fund is earmarked for specific services that the city provides. Police services being one of them, fire services, I think in this case, there's a Hubbard Fire District, so they might have their own portion of the pie of the property taxes. But this is in the service area of both fire and police, and additional revenue that's generated from taxes will pay for those services at this location. The same goes for park services that the city provides. The townhome lot size is pretty typical for what you would see in many locations. The townhome lots are 25 feet wide, which is, if you have attached units, that's typical for a two or one car garage from the rear. And the footprint for that unit width and length, it's going to be a 2-story unit, but it could certainly fit on a lot of that size, and would be a 3 or 4 bedroom unit. The HOA issue is something that the city will review. The city will review the HOA that's going to be required for this development. That will be reviewed with the building permit phase of the project. So the city will, I'm sure if there's been other HOA issues in the past, we'll make sure that this developer is doing it in a way that protects the city from some of those issues that we've seen before. The impacts to ODOT facilities, we do have Jennifer Danziger on the line. She can answer specific questions about the traffic analysis, but I'll just generally state that the scope of the analysis was determined by city staff, by Marion County staff, and by ODOT staff. And they were the drivers of what was looked at and to be analyzed by our traffic engineer. And then once the draft report was available, those agencies then provided comments, which our engineer then had to address in the report. So there was a thorough analysis of all the issues. And everything from, adding a lane or an impact or an intersection, or all those things were thought through. And it was determined in this case that additional traffic signals were not warranted according to the analysis and the review by those agencies. And then as far as the apartment complex question, I think we answered those, while you're speaking, Tammy, but, if there are any other questions or any other issues that somebody might have raised,
Oh, I forgot to mention, when was the analysis of the traffic again? When was that done?
Can you, jump in here, Jennifer, at this point?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The analysis looked at the future build out year, so it was the whole development through 2028.
But when was the traffic study? When did that time take place, the time frame?
She froze.
It was just updated. There was one that was prepared in 2022 with the original application, and it was updated just this spring.
With the change in Ellen Road?
We were not required to look at that. ODOT, when they did that design, did a long-term design, and there is a connection between Boone's Ferry and Ellen Road. I cannot remember the name of the street, but that was under construction or in design, and they did not require us to do it. It does carry site traffic. It's very far away, and they did not feel that it was appropriate for this development to be trying to fix problems that far away from the site. And again, as I mentioned, they had done, the ODOT did that project. I don't know if they had a consultant or not. So they would have looked at a 20-year forecast, and so they did not require us to do that. So the furthest north we went was the signal and the signals at 551 and 99E up at Drimmen Shoal.
Can I get you to state your name and address to the record as well?
Absolutely. I apologize. Jennifer Danziger. I'm with Lancaster Mobley, 321 Southwest 4th, Portland, Oregon, 97214. And did you want a phone?
No, that's fine. Thank you, though. Much appreciated.
Sure thing. So I think there was a comment about G and 99E. We did look at that intersection. It is certainly congested. Unfortunately, based on the criteria for installing a traffic signal, it doesn't meet the thresholds or the criteria that ODOT looks for. And because it's a state highway, we have to follow their processes for that. So I'm glad to hear they are looking at other things. It is a congested location, and I expect that people will look at very unlikely that any future railroad crossing will ever happen. The rail board is very, very, very restrictive, and at best, you can get an exchange, but it would be, I've never heard of anyone successfully getting a new one as a crossing across. So it is a barrier within the city that is probably not going to change from an access perspective. Was there anything else?
Sound like it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm gonna let our attorney Garrett step up to the mic now.
Thank you so much for letting me.
Good evening, Garrett Stevenson. My address is 1211 Southwest Fifth Avenue, Portland, Oregon, 97204. I just wanted to, luckily Steve covered everything that I was already going to talk about, but I just wanted to briefly talk about the density issue and the lot size issue. And while Commissioner Cardle was making his comments, I was looking back to the staff report just to refamiliarize myself with the density calculations, because I think it's important to understand what that looks like when you look at these lot sizes. So the maximum allowable density is based on there's a range of maximums, and the maximum allowable density is as high as 543 units, and we're proposing 320, which is less than 60% of the maximum allowable density for the whole site. I think that that is probably more favorable of a compromise, frankly, than most any developers would typically offer. Most developers want to build out to the full density. In this case, you've got two natural areas that cannot be built on. And so the whole point of the PUD is to allow something resembling the design density to be achieved in a smaller area. And frankly, that's why you have those small lots. I don't think it's practical anymore to do the type of development. I live in an older home, and when that was built, we didn't have to avoid streams, we would fill wetlands and so on and so forth, and you get larger lots. To be perfectly blunt, those days are over. They've been over for a long time. And I think with a community like Hubbard, where you're used to those larger lots, it's a hard pill to swallow. But that's what the zoning calls for. And I would encourage the planning commission to approve this because I think it's a very good compromise. It's right in the middle of what would be somewhere between 0 units and the maximum density. And, we don't want to, as I've done this work for a long time, and one thing I've learned about development is that you don't want to necessarily underdo it. It doesn't mean you want to overdo it, but if you're going to invest a whole lot in building out a new community, you want to make sure that you're satisfying the density needs of the city. And the reason for that is every 20 years, the city goes through a process which resulted in this parcel coming into it, where they say, do we have enough land for all the housing we're going to need? And every time we underbuild a site, every 20 years, they say, well, no, we don't, so we need to bring in more land. And so I think this is the right balance of efficiency. I mean, believe me, Hubbard is not the only community dealing with growth pressure. There's rules coming down from the legislature and some of the administrative agencies that frankly are going to be a lot more restrictive when it comes to density. But in this case, again, the compromise is we do more open space in return for smaller lots and a smaller amount of density. And on the open space question, I'll just read what Holly wrote in her staff report. The subject site contains a total of 2,455,000 square feet. Therefore, we are required to produce dedicate 491,183 square feet of open space. And this proposal has almost 800,000 square feet of open space, which greatly exceeds the minimum of 20%. So fully understand the lot sizes, but again, if this were a completely unencumbered site with no wetlands and no streams that we had to make sure we're staying out of, we'd probably do larger lot sizes. But in this case, it's the only practical way to develop this and still make it pencil ID attractive for a developer to actually build. So I encourage you guys to think about that when you're deliberating. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
I just had a question as to, is the applicant as we see now generally going to be the developer, or is this sort of a placeholder to collaborate with a developer down the road? And just from my standpoint, as in terms of any kind of timeline, how this is going to build out,
Right.
Is it a future deal or is it? I just don't want to see.
It's a fair question.
I just don't want to see us get halfway in and then,
Yeah, so there's no scenario in which development starts and, it just somehow, stops after phase 1 or phase 2. I don't think that's realistic at all. I think, to be perfectly honest, in this instance, so much work had been done on this project that I think it's a very attractive project. The original developer decided to sit on the sidelines. That developer may come back in, may not. But the goal here is to partner with the developer who's going to do the whole project. Now, the way it's set up, of course, based on the proposed conditions of approval, is that if the developer doesn't step up to do the project within 2 years, it either becomes nothing or we ask for an extension. Sure. And I anticipate, depending on interest rates and so forth, that we will not have any problems finding a good developer, or the previous developer may step back in. With that being said, I think it provides the city a lot of assurance about what's going to be there, at least for a number of years. One of the things, and I started my career actually as a city planner before I went to law school. One of the things we always wish we could do is say, let's take a project through a planning process and then find a developer that wants to build it, because it gives us a lot more control over what we're looking at. I think in this instance, you know, the current owner wanted to be very, very productive in its relationship with the city. I mean, we completely changed the application in a number of ways to respond to the concerns of the community, the concerns of the planning commission. And that's because the owner really, I think, wants the community to thrive and wants to be a good neighbor. And that gives the city, frankly, an opportunity to get a lot of what it's looking for here. And, you know, we want to make sure that it's attractive to a future buyer. We think it will be. But any buyer that comes in will have to probably take down the whole property.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that because we're platting by phases, you can't, you know, there has to be infrastructure in, there has to be bonding before we can record a plat for any of these small lots. So I'd anticipate you get a master developer that would come in and do the whole project. And at that point, they're going to know exactly what they're getting. There's not going to be any question, which is actually a really good place for a developer to be.
Absolutely. Building's a known commodity, much.
Exactly.
Outside, so.
And when you look at things like, there was some questions about proportional share payments, and most of my developer clients, they're like, look, as long as we know what the costs are going to be, we can factor that into our pro forma and we can make it work. It's the lack of, and it's not the case here, but I think frankly, Holly and your city staff have done an amazing job on this application in removing all of the various points at which a developer may say there's too many unknowns here. I mean, we've gone through the SDC credit process. We know what that looks like. We know roughly what the proportional share payments are going to be. We know exactly what the street improvements are going to look like. I mean, it's I don't see very many of projects that are this clear in what is going to happen. And that's a good thing for the city. It's a good thing for a future developer buyer. And so I think that, you know, of so many projects that I've worked on, we're not trying to maximize and you know, squeeze every dime out of the city. This is really, I think it's been a good partnership, at least in the time that I've been involved, and I wasn't involved during the original iteration. And a lot of that is credit to Steve and Holly and you guys for giving good feedback. So, you know, totally recognize it's different than what you're used to seeing, but again, the city brought this into its urban growth boundary, it annexed it, and it has certain density goals that it needs to meet. And I think we'd be giving it short shrift by denying it because it doesn't look like what's there before, simply because it's almost impossible to build what has been there before. So, and I think, you know, this much parkland, I know when I looked at the plan, we really worked hard to make sure that ADA accessible needs are met. I think it's going to be a really great, a great set of park areas. And the fact of getting back to how we deal with the parks, I think it was very generous for the owner to be willing to have the HOA manage that parkland until the city had enough staff in order to do it itself, because that's going to be a great cost for that HOA. So I think it's another feather in your cap. Thank you.
Thank you. Holly, you had a point to make?
We have not introduced Garrett's letter into the record yet. Do you want to do that yourself, Garrett, or?
I don't have a paper copy. So,
Or Vicky, do you have a copy?
excuse me, Vicky, I think I sent you a copy and you said you'd put it in the record. So basically, there was a concern about the Broadacres frontage improvement as being required with phase one because it's so far away. And out of an abundance of caution, I drafted a letter to just reinforce what Holly mentioned, which is that this was a typo. In case the planning commission disagreed with Holly, I wanted to make sure we were explaining to you why it's just not feasible to do those frontage improvements. And just so you know, the practical reason for that is most developers, they build their frontage improvements in phases after they've sold some homes. So they come in, they take the land down, they have some money to build that first phase, they get some homes sold, and that puts fuel in the gas tank for the future phases. the requirement, again, I think it's a non-issue at this point, because it's a typo. But, I'm always trying to cover my bases and make sure that if for some reason that squeaks through, I've at least said what I need to say. So I don't think it's important in light of what Holly mentioned for you guys to consider this too carefully. We believe it's a typo, and we've got a really good phasing plan, that's gonna make sure that those improvements are built with phase 4.
Does that give you enough to get that in the record? Okay, thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
And thank you, Holly, for pointing that point. Alright, we're at the point where, it'll be the end of interaction back and forth, and it'll be between, staff and ourselves, so.
Glenn, can I make one more comment or no?
We're beyond that point.
Okay,
sorry.
no, problem.
We're, past
Nope,
that.
I'm good.
They have the last word on a rebuttal, so.
Oh, okay.
Alrighty, so, before I close public hearing, any other questions of planning commissioners of staff from anyone? You guys have the information you want to make an informed decision? As a reminder, once I close the hearing, only commissioners or staff may speak. Public testimony is now over. I will close the public hearing at 8:01 p.m. and I will entertain discussion amongst the planning commission members on the application or motion. I'm ready to speak one.
I just don't like the density, but, you know, they've made a good case and they have swayed me to, probably support what they've got with the parks and the 4,000, national paths.
I kind of agree with you, Phil. The lot size concerns me. It feels out of character with the rest of Hubbard. But considering the alternative might be that they develop the whole site with, 540 apartment units, this seems more in character with that. And although it might not be a neighborhood I choose to live in, there are people that want to live in smaller, denser homes. And this feels like a reasonable compromise to me in terms of density as well as, some of these park and recreation facilities.
Coming in kind of late, I think that, in my opinion, they sort of came back in good faith to update some plans to make people happy, which is more than I've seen others do. So,
No, I agree. I think feedback was definitely taken
yeah,
very seriously.
appreciate it very much.
Yeah, I appreciate that as well too. Hearing a motion.
Let's move on before you like it.
I move to approve with the two recommendations that were previously discussed. Amending, this is condition of approval number 5 to strike item A, which was determined to be a typo, as well as amending condition of approval 17 to correct the typo such that it says tract J. With those two additions, I move to approve the proposed development.
I will second.
Have a motion and a second. Is that clear enough language for recording?
Yes.
Go ahead, Holly.
Does this include adoption of the findings and recommended conditions as presented?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks for that clarifying point. Do you need that motion restated then, or are you good? Okay. Vicky's giving me the all clear. So any other discussion on the motion? Hearing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Right.
All those opposed? Carries. Welcome to Hubbard with your development.
Back, there we go. Have to leave good bed.
Alrighty, motion to adjourn? I asked for a motion to adjourn, so we'll move back to the video. Okay, so we got a motion, to adjourn any discussion?
I think.
Here, and we'll move. to a vote.
Lot of
All those in favor, say aye.
Thank you for taking a look at
Yeah,
those.
thank you.
There you go. Hopefully the Hubbard community plan, hopefully we could do a.
How are you?
event for you.
Hop in.
Yeah.